This is a true story, documented and published by the Vatican itself. The priest's account was authorized in an appearance on the Brazilian podcast Inteligência Limitada. The Church aims to share stories like this to remind us that evil exists and that it can be at your door.
My name is Father Thomas Cardoso. I have 42 years of priesthood, and during all that time, I always believed my faith would be tested in ways I could never imagine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night in October 2019. I had been authorized by the Vatican 3 years earlier to perform exorcisms. Yes, that exists. It's not a movie thing. It is real, documented, and extremely rare. The Church doesn't go around performing exorcisms on anyone who claims to be possessed. There are protocols, investigations, psychiatric evaluations, all very serious. And in most cases, in the vast majority, there is nothing supernatural involved. Until that night, I had performed 17 procedures. They all ended the same way, with prayers, holy water, and relieved families who were finally able to sleep peacefully. I always knew, deep down, that I was merely offering spiritual comfort. I had never seen anything that defied logic, nothing that made me question the line between the natural and the other side. The house was on the outskirts of the city, on a dirt road that wound between tall, silent eucalyptus trees. It was late afternoon when I arrived, and the sun was already hiding behind the mountains, tinting the sky a sickly orange that would soon give way to grey. The property was old but well cared for. The house was 2 stories, with dark wooden windows and a garden that looked like it had been abandoned for a few weeks. The flowers were wilted, leaves had piled up in the corners. When I turned off the car engine, I noticed the silence, the kind of heavy silence that seems to suck away the surrounding sounds. No birds, no crickets, only the wind dragging dry leaves over the stone ground. I grabbed my black case, inside it the Roman ritual, holy water, consecrated oil, my crucifix and my rosary, and walked to the front door. Before I could even knock, the door opened. It was the father of the family. A man in his 50s, graying hair, deep, tired eyes. He didn't smile. He only nodded and let me in. Inside, the house was welcoming. Contrary to what the external atmosphere suggested, there was a smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with something sweet, perhaps cake. The living room was simple, a beige fabric sofa, a bookshelf with books and family photographs, a crucifix on the wall, all very ordinary, very normal. The man introduced himself as Roberto. His wife, Mariana, was sitting on the couch, hands clasped on her lap, eyes red as if she had recently cried. She greeted me with a timid nod. Next to her, 2 young men in their 20s, the couple's sons, I suppose, remained silent, watching me with a mixture of hope and distrust. Roberto offered me coffee, which I accepted out of politeness. I sat in the armchair in front of them and opened my notebook. "Tell me what's happening," I asked, keeping the calm, professional tone I always use in these situations. Mariana was the one who began to speak. Her voice trembled but was controlled. She told me that their youngest daughter, Sophia, 17, had completely changed over the last 3 months. Once a cheerful, studious girl, full of life. Now she spent hours locked in her room, talking to herself, refusing to eat. She said strange things, insults she would never use, words in languages the family didn't recognize. Roberto added to it. He said objects fell from shelves for no reason, that doors slammed in the middle of the night, that the temperature in Sophia's room plummeted even in summer, and that one night he found her standing in the hallway with her back turned, completely still at 3 in the morning. When he called out to her, Sophia slowly turned her face and smiled. But it wasn't her smile. I wrote everything down. I asked the usual questions, medical history, substance use, recent traumas. They denied it all. They said they had already taken Sophia to 3 different psychiatrists. All had prescribed medication. None of it worked. I nodded, closing the notebook. May I see her? Roberto hesitated. He exchanged a glance with his wife. Then he nodded and led me up to the second floor. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit. Only a weak bulb hung from the ceiling. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet. There were 3 doors. The middle one was closed. Roberto stopped in front of it and knocked lightly. Sophia, the priest is here. Silence. He turned the door handle and opened the door slowly. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn. There was a strange smell in the air. Something between mold and something more acidic, almost metallic. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and then I saw her. Sophia was sitting on the bed, her back to the door, her long, disheveled hair falling over her shoulders. She did not move when we entered. Sophia, I called softly. My name is Father Thomas. I came here to help you. She did not respond. She did not turn around. She just sat there, motionless like a statue. I looked at Roberto. He swallowed hard and whispered, "She stays like this sometimes, for hours." I approached slowly, holding my crucifix. When I reached the side of the bed, I could finally see her face. Her eyes were open, fixed on the wall, but there was nothing there, only peeling wallpaper. "Sophia," I repeated. This time she blinked, slowly, and then, without moving her body, her eyes slid toward me, and she smiled. That smile, it wasn't natural. It wasn't the smile of a frightened or confused teenager. It was too wide, forced, as if the facial muscles were being pulled by invisible strings. "Hello, Father," she said. The voice was hers, but there was something wrong in the tone, something drawn out, almost mocking. "Sophia, your parents are worried about you. They asked me to come here and pray. Do you mind?" She tilted her head to the side, still smiling. "Pray? Why? I'm fine. Better than ever." Roberto stepped forward, voice breaking. "Sophia, please, let the priest help." Her smile vanished instantly. Her eyes narrowed, and for a brief second, it seemed like something passed behind that gaze. Something cold, something that was watching me. "All right, Daddy," she said now with the voice of an obedient child. Too docile. "I'll let him." I asked the family to go downstairs and wait in the living room. I needed to speak with Sophia alone first. Roberto hesitated, but eventually agreed. Before leaving, he gave me one last look, a look that said, "Please bring my daughter back." When the door closed, the silence once again weighed on the room. I sat on the chair beside the bed and opened my Bible. "Sophia, I'm going to ask you some questions. Can you answer honestly?" She nodded, now with a neutral expression, almost bored. I asked the standard questions. If she felt pain, if she heard voices, if she had nightmares. She answered everything mechanically in monosyllables, nothing that indicated anything beyond a possible psychological condition. Then as I flipped through the ritual, something happened. The temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous, as if someone had opened a door to winter. My breath began to come out in vapor. I felt a chill up my spine. I looked at Sophia. She remained motionless, but now her eyes were fixed on me, piercing. "Are you feeling cold, Father?" she asked, her voice soft, almost affectionate. "A little," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Funny," she continued, tilting her head again. "I'm feeling very hot." That's when I noticed. Her skin was covered in sweat. Drops ran down her forehead, her neck, but she didn't look uncomfortable. On the contrary, she looked satisfied. I closed the Bible and stood up. "I'll ask your family to come upstairs. We're going to pray together." "No need," she said, her voice now lower, almost a whisper. "He's already here." My heart raced. "Who is here, Sophia?" She did not answer. She only turned her face toward the wall and started to laugh, a low, guttural laugh that didn't match the slight body of a teenager. I quickly left the room and went downstairs. The family was gathered in the living room, all standing, anxious. "Let's begin," I announced, trying to hide the disturbance in my voice. "I need everyone to come upstairs and stay in the room with her. It's important that you're present." They agreed without hesitation. We went up together. When I opened the bedroom door, Sophia was exactly as I had left her, with her back turned, laughing to herself. I positioned the family around the bed. I opened my Roman ritual and began reciting the initial prayers. I sprinkled holy water around the room. I traced the sign of the cross over Sophia. She stopped laughing, and it was then that we heard it. A sound coming from outside the house, a growl, deep, fierce. Then a bark, loud, desperate. And right after, something slammed against the front door with brutal force. Bang! We all turned, startled. Bang, bang, bang. The sound was rhythmic, violent, as if something were trying to knock the door down. And between the blows, we heard growls, furious barking, scratches on the wood. Roberto furrowed his brow, confused. "What the hell?" Mariana put her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. I tried to keep my focus. "Ignore it. Keep praying with me." But the noise only grew. The animal outside had gone berserk, scratching, slamming, growling as if it wanted to rip the door apart. Sophia on the bed had stopped moving, but I could feel it. She was listening and smiling. I continued reciting the prayers, raising my voice to overtake the barks and violent blows against the door. My hand trembled slightly as I held the crucifix over Sophia, but I could not show weakness. Not there. Not at that moment. Exorcizo te, immundissim spiritus. The Latin words echoed through the room, but they seemed to be swallowed by something greater. Something invisible that hovered in the air, dense as fog. The blows on the door continued, rhythmic, insistent, and between them that growl. It wasn't like that of an ordinary dog. It was too deep, guttural, almost human. Bang, bang, bang. Mariana began to cry softly, her hands squeezing the rosary so hard her knuckles turned white. One of the sons, the younger one, was slowly retreating toward the wall, his eyes fixed on the bedroom door as if he expected something to burst through at any moment. Roberto, at my side, whispered, "Father, what is that?" "Focus on the prayers," I replied, not taking my eyes off Sophia. "Don't let it distract you." But I myself was being distracted, because Sophia had begun to move. Slowly, she turned her head toward me, her eyes still fixed, still piercing. But now there was something more. An intensity, a presence behind that gaze that made me feel small. "You shouldn't have come here, Father," she said, her voice now different, deeper, older. I ignored it. I continued with the ritual. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." She began to laugh again, but this time the laughter was accompanied by something else. A sound coming from within her, a hiss, as if more than one voice were trying to come out at the same time. The room's temperature fell even further. My breath came out in thick plumes. The windows began to shake. There was no wind, but they shook, and then something fell. The crucifix on the wall. It didn't slip. It didn't tip. It was ripped from the wall and thrown to the floor with force, shattering into pieces. Mariana screamed. Roberto stepped back, stumbling over his own leg. "Keep praying," I ordered, my voice now firm, authoritative. "Do not stop." But the chaos was only beginning. The dresser drawers began opening and closing on their own. Clack, clack, clack. One after the other, in sequence, as if invisible hands were manipulating them. The ceiling light started to flicker. Light, darkness, light, darkness. And outside, the animal continued, more furious. When we finished, Sophia finally blinked. She slowly turned her head toward us, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't that dark presence. It was fear, pure, genuine fear. as if she knew exactly what was inside her and could do nothing to stop it. We left the house in silence. Miguel lit a cigarette on the porch, something I had never seen him do. He took a long drag and looked at the horizon, lost in thought. Then, without looking at me, he said something I will never forget. He told me that this case was different, that the entity in that house was not common, that it wasn't just possessing Sophia, it was spreading, contaminating everything around it, and that if it wasn't contained, it would go beyond that family. He warned me to be careful, not to underestimate what we were facing, and never, under any circumstances, to let it know my true fears. Because then, there would be nowhere I could hide. The sons remained standing, leaning against the wall, still processing the terror. I took a deep breath and sat in the armchair. I needed to appear calm, composed, even though inside my heart was still racing. And what you witnessed, I began, choosing my words carefully, is not uncommon in cases like this. Physical manifestations, temperature changes, objects moving. These are signs of a strong spiritual presence. Roberto raised his eyes to me. Father, that was real. That was not my daughter. I know, I replied, but she is still there. Sophia is still inside. And we will bring her back. Mariana sobbed. How long will this take? I can't predict, but I will return. Once a week, I'll come back to continue the prayers. It's a process. It requires patience. It requires faith. They nodded, clinging to the hope I offered. I stayed a few more minutes, guiding them on what to do. Keep the house blessed. Pray daily. Don't leave Sophia alone. And above all, don't show fear. When I stood to leave, Roberto walked me to the door. He looked exhausted, defeated. I asked him if I could request a favor. Of course. Whatever it is. He hesitated, looking at the floor. Next time I come, would it be possible to ask someone in the family to restrain the dog or keep it outside? That noise, it was very disturbing. It made it hard to concentrate and hindered our prayers. Roberto nodded, but didn't look me in the eyes, and he opened the door for me. I stepped out onto the porch. Night had already fallen completely. The air was cold and damp. I looked around, searching for the dog. Maybe it was tied up somewhere. Maybe it had run off after all that commotion. But I saw nothing. No animal, no movement. Only the wind dragging leaves through the silent garden. I turned to Roberto, who was still at the door. Where is it now? The dog. Roberto looked at me with a strange expression. Confused, almost frightened. Father, he said, his voice trembling. That's the problem. My stomach clenched. We don't have a dog. The world seemed to stop. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. My mind tried to process what he had just said, but it couldn't. It made no sense. What do you mean, you don't have a dog? I repeated, my voice coming out lower than I intended. Roberto slowly shook his head, eyes brimming. We never have, Father. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought only my family and I were hearing that disturbance. My heart raced again. I turned to the front door, the massive wooden door. I looked at it closely for the first time, and then I saw it. Scratches, deep, recent. Claw marks that tore the wood from top to bottom. Splinters scattered across the porch floor. But they weren't dog claw marks. They were too big, too long, and they were arranged in a strange way, almost like fingers, like hands. I took a step back, the air leaving my lungs. Father? Roberto called, his voice distant, muffled by the buzzing in my ears. I looked at him, then at the door, then at the darkness around the house, and then, slowly, I raised my eyes to the second floor. Sophia's bedroom window was open. I was sure it had been closed when I left. And there, in the room's dimness, lit only by the faint moonlight, I saw it. A silhouette, standing, motionless, watching. It wasn't Sophia. It was something bigger, broader, with shoulders that did not fit human proportions. And then, slowly, the silhouette tilted its head to the side. and smiled. My hand gripped the crucifix in my pocket so tightly I felt my skin tear. "Father, are you all right?" Roberto asked, touching my shoulder. I blinked. I looked again at the window. The silhouette was gone. The window was closed, as if it had never been open. I took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in my hands. I turned to Roberto and forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." He nodded but did not seem convinced. "I'll return next week," I said, quickly descending the porch steps. "Keep up the prayers and keep the doors locked." I got in the car, started the engine, and left as fast as I could without seeming like I was fleeing. But I was. Because for the first time in 42 years of priesthood, I felt something I had never felt before. Real fear. Fear of something I could not name. Something that was not only inside that house, something that now knew who I was. I drove for 20 minutes in absolute silence. My hands were still shaking on the wheel. My mind tried to rationalize what had happened, but each attempt ran into the same impossible conclusion. That was not a dog. It never was. I pulled over on the shoulder, unable to go on. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. I turned off the engine and closed my eyes, trying to calm the heart pounding in my chest. I prayed. I recited the Our Father 3 times in a row, but the words felt empty, hollow, because something had changed in that house. It wasn't just Sophia who was possessed. The entire house, the family, and whoever was willing to help them were in danger. I picked up my cell phone and called Bishop Henrique, my direct superior, and the person who had authorized me to perform exorcisms. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him everything, every detail. The temperature, the objects moving, Sophia's laughter, the silhouette in the window, and especially the dog that didn't exist. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The bishop instructed me to return, but not alone. He would send Father Miguel, someone with more experience, and he warned me. What I had heard pounding on that door was not a dog. It was an imitation, a mockery. The demon was testing me, seeing how far I would go. His words should have comforted me, but they didn't, because I knew deep down that it wasn't just a test, it was a warning. I started the car again and headed home, but throughout the entire drive, I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me. Something that growled, that scratched, that pounded, something that now knew my name. I got home shortly after midnight. I locked all the doors, all the windows. I lit candles and prayed for an hour before trying to sleep. But sleep didn't come, because every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. Bang, bang, bang. And that growl, deep, guttural, coming from somewhere far away, but at the same time, far too close. I got up 3 times during the night to check the front door, always locked, always intact. But the 3rd time, when I looked out the window beside the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Footprints on the porch, large, deep, imprinted in the dust that had accumulated there. They weren't a dog's, they weren't a human's. They were something between the two, and they led up to my door and stopped there, as if something had stood on the other side, waiting, watching. I slowly backed away, the crucifix clenched in my hand, my heart racing, and then I heard it, very softly, almost imperceptible, a scratch on the door, slow, deliberate, scratch. I stopped breathing, scratch, and then a breath, heavy, hoarse, on the other side of the wood. It wasn't human. It was something forced. Something that imitated the act of breathing, but did not need air. And between the breaths, I heard something that made me back up to the wall. A sniff, as if it were smelling me through the door. I stood there paralyzed for minutes that felt like hours. My whole body covered in cold sweat, my hand squeezing the crucifix so hard I felt my skin tear. The scratching stopped, the breathing ceased. And then, footsteps, heavy, dragging, moving away from the door, down the porch steps, disappearing into the darkness. When I finally had the courage to move, I ran to the bedroom, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night praying with all the lights on, because now I knew the truth. What was in that house did not stay there. It came with me as well. It wanted everyone. It was something very strong and evil, and for the first time in my entire life, I wondered if my faith would be enough to face what was coming. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the bed, my back to the wall, the crucifix in one hand and the Bible in the other, waiting for dawn like a condemned man waits for the end of his sentence. Every sound in the house made me jump, the creak of the wood, the wind hitting the window, the clock on the wall marking the seconds with torturous slowness. But the worst was the silence between the sounds. Because in those moments I could feel it. The presence. It wasn't something I saw. It wasn't something I heard. It was something that simply was. Like a pressure in the chest. Like an invisible weight in the air. As if something were on the other side of the bedroom door, waiting, watching. When the sun finally rose, I felt such relief that I almost cried. I got up, washed my face, and tried to convince myself that it had all been the result of exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion, the stress of an especially intense exorcism. But when I looked out the bedroom window, I saw the footprints still there, on the porch, imprinted in the dust, real, tangible, and I knew it had not been my imagination. I spent the following days in a state of constant alert. I couldn't concentrate on Mass. I couldn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours a night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound seemed to carry intention. I returned to the family's house a week later, accompanied by Father Miguel, as the bishop had promised. Miguel was a 60-year-old man, hair completely white, tired but steady eyes. He had performed many exorcisms over the course of his life. If anyone knew what to do, it was him. When we arrived, the house looked even gloomier than before. The windows were shut, the curtains drawn. There was a strange smell in the air, as if something were rotting somewhere hidden. Roberto greeted us at the door. He had aged 10 years in a week, sunken eyes, pale skin, hands trembling slightly. He led us to Sophia's room without saying a word. She was lying on the bed, motionless, her eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. She didn't react when we entered. She didn't blink. She just lay there, like a broken doll. Miguel and I performed the ritual together. He led the prayers, and I accompanied him. We sprinkled holy water. We traced crosses. We recited the sacred words with all the strength we had, and this time there was no noise at the door. No growls, no pounding, only silence. A heavy, oppressive silence, as if something were holding its breath. When we finished, Sophia finally blinked. She slowly turned her head toward us, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't that dark presence. It was fear, pure, genuine fear. We left the house in silence. Miguel lit a cigarette on the porch, something I had never seen him do. He took a long drag and looked out at the horizon, lost in thought. Then, without looking at me, he said something I will never forget. He told me that this case was different, that the entity in that house was not common, that it wasn't just possessing Sophia, it was spreading, contaminating everything around it, and that if it wasn't contained, it would go beyond that family. He warned me to be careful, not to underestimate what we were facing, and never, under any circumstances, to let it know my true fears. Because then, there would be nowhere I could hide. In the months that followed, I kept going back to the house. I continued performing the rituals. Sophia slowly improved. The manifestations diminished. The family began to breathe again. But I was never the same again. Because every night, when I close my eyes, I still hear it. Bang, bang, bang. And that growl, and that breathing. And I know that somewhere on the other side of a door I cannot see, something is still waiting, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting to come in. That was the story of my first exorcism, and it was also the last time I slept through the night without waking up startled. Many ask me if Sophia was cured, if the family returned to normal, if that house finally found peace. The truth is, yes. After months of rituals, prayers, and follow-up, Sophia went back to who she was. The family managed to move on. The house, well, the house is still there. Silent. Empty now. They moved out 6 months later, but I know that something remained. Not in the house, in me, because since that night I learned something that no book, no training, no authorization from the Vatican could teach me. Evil is not just an external force. It's not just something that possesses. It's not just something that invades. It is something that observes, that studies, that learns, and when you look at it, it looks back, and it never forgets. I'm still a priest. I still perform exorcisms when I'm called, but now every time I enter a house, every time I hear a report of possession, every time I hold my crucifix and begin to recite the sacred prayers, I wonder, am I helping those people, or am I just opening one more door, a door that once opened never fully closes again? If you're hearing this story now, you might think it's just fiction, that it's just another horror tale to entertain, to frighten. But I ask you, have you ever heard something pounding on your door in the middle of the night, and when you went to check, there was no one there? Have you ever felt you were being watched, even when you were completely alone? Have you ever had the sensation that something was on the other side of the wall, breathing along with you? If the answer is yes, maybe you should start paying attention. Because sometimes what knocks on the door isn't asking to come in, it's just warning you that it's already inside. If this story made you afraid, if it made you look at the dark corners of your room, if it made you question what really exists beyond what we can see, leave your like, comment on what you felt, tell us if you've experienced something similar, and subscribe to the channel, because this was only the first story, and believe me, there's much more coming, much more.